And you've just heard Cage Rest Way Out in the Clouds, which is the opening track on Prilotech's, the new album from Adam Stafford. And I'm delighted to be joined by Adam now. Hello.
Hello, Alistair. How are you?
I'm really well. I'm really well. Good to see you. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about the new album. But before we get into the kind of details about it, Prilotech's the name. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it's really just an abbreviation of, I think I read somewhere in a book, it's a character talking about how he has these private little exorcisms, and it really stood out. And instead of calling the album, because this is what I do, I did this with Imaginary Walls Collapse, and I did this with Build a Harbor immediately. I basically steal titles from texts or from things that friends say. And this is and it's no difference in this case. But then I thought if you abbreviated it to Prilotechs, the X could be, and it could be, it's kind of like Mercury Rev. You can, does the Rev mean reverent? Does it mean
Mhm.
reveries? Does it mean, so the X can mean exorcism, excursions, extractions. So you can put your own little spin on the X. And I just think it's kind of a friend of mine once said to me, "Oh, you never have your albums are never one word titles." And this is a kind of a bit of a two fingers to him by by saying, here's my one word title album, because they're always really long and strung out or hard to pronounce. I mean, Prilotechs isn't the easiest to pronounce either, but that's my reasoning for it, basically.
I like the idea of private little exorcisms as well. It's something to think about, definitely. Actually, titles on the album, there's some cracking titles for song titles as well. Youth Disorder Telekutri is one of my favourite
Mhm.
ones. Crushed Heart Steamroller, and a track we'll hear later on, Flailing Signets. Do you enjoy that side of things? Kind of giving your songs interesting names?
I love it. Yeah, I kind of I live for it more than I do the actual chore of writing lyrics. I really like to assign songs with titles that that wouldn't readily, you wouldn't really think about assigning those, or songs that or sorry, titles that have no relevance to the content of the song, or used to sort of Telekutri was a headline from a newspaper, and it was about youth disorder in the town, which I thought was just a really funny song title, since it's so sort of geographically specific to central Scotland.
And in terms of this is your 16th album, is that right?
I think so, give or take, yeah.
So how do you approach a new album? Is it the same every time, or do you have themes that you want to look at? What's this? What's your system, so to speak?
Um, it usually happens that when I feel the notion, I'll just sit down and try and improvise things, and then once I've got a sort of bass or a bass line, for not as in like a bass line, the bass guitar, but like a bass line for the song, then I'll start to work on it a little bit more and then refine it. And then after a while, you start to collect songs, I suppose.
Mhm.
And then once you collect those songs, for me, the writings or the assimilation starts to take place almost naturally. So the songs start to talk by themselves. They start to tell you where or what project this best suited for. I mean, all of these songs were written sort of parallel to when I did the last album, which was Daylight Slavings, which is
Mhm.
all kind of solo piano and keyboard music, but at the same time, parallel to that, I was writing these songs too. And I thought about putting some of the more ballady songs on Daylight Slavins, but I, I wanted to keep eventually, wanted to keep them separate from the instrumental stuff, and then more of the singer songwriting kind of songs that eventually ended up on this album. So I guess that's the process. Trying to describe it to you is it's quite an organic
Yeah.
way of working. I don't have any set themes or topics that I immediately think of. It almost reveals itself as the process goes along.
So the kind of finished whole reveals itself as you go along. Because I think of you as an album's artist. You know, they're kind of coherent wholes when you get to listen to them, rather than a collection of songs or tracks. I don't know if that's how you think of them.
Yeah, they are. They have to cohere in um, a sense of, they all have to unify together, I
Mhm.
think. But that process of unification is quite organic. It's like I said, some of these songs could easily have fit on the last album, but I guess I wanted to keep the last album purely instrumental and not really have any singing on it. Yeah, it's a strange thing because it's hard to describe and articulate how it all comes together, but it usually it usually works itself out, to be honest. It's one of these things that I'm lucky enough to, and I think it's maybe just practicing this over time, but
Mhm.
it's just the process. Some people lock themselves in a room and they have to write a song about this certain topic or what is on their mind that day. But for me, it kind of almost comes instinctively.
So do you think that process has developed over time, over a span of albums?
I think so, yeah. And I've released a lot of experimental improvised albums as well. And that that kind of process is a little bit different because it's not as it's not as focused as writing something that has verse, chorus, medley, plus lyrics, plus lots of instrumentation. It's more free form, and I really love doing that stuff as well. I love doing the free form things. But the process is something that's been developed over time for sure.
And in terms of Prilatex, how was it recorded? What was the process there?
I recorded it with my regular contributor, Robbie Leshuk, who's produced and recorded most of my albums from 2013 onwards. And then Neil Pennycook from Merceau has a new studio in Newington called
Okay.
Geist. And we had been talking last year about, you know, setting up some sort of recording around the opening of this new studio. So it was all done in a fairly small studio in Newington, with Neil and Robbie.
And then you've got other people involved as well, haven't you? There are other musicians and artists on the album.
Yeah, so the drums on the first three tracks are Sean Mitchell, who plays in a great Glaswegian band called Lloyd's House.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, we also have Robin Dawson, who plays in Merceau as well. She sings and plays some violin on the LP. And my friend Jalen, who I previously did some film music with a couple of years ago. She came in and did some vocals for us as well. So it's a real collaborative effort, actually. It was probably the most collaborative album I've ever done, I think,
Right.
in terms of not having a set and rigid agenda of what we were going to do, and rather just let the contributors try and um, improvise or add their parts to it. And usually when it comes to recording on a tight budget with tight time scales, I'm quite dogmatic about some things, but in this case, it was very, let's maybe see how it goes as we record it, and that was part of the process as well that I wanted to explore with this one.
And is it part of the process that you enjoy? Because I guess it's giving up a little bit of control.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a total collaboration. It's it, without these contributions, the album would just be it wouldn't be as good. And I really enjoyed collaborating, especially after all of the kind of COVID and lockdown stuff, where you know I was in my house just with my family, thinking that everybody was going to die, and I wasn't going to see any of my friends or family again. So it was, yeah, it was really beautiful to get into that sort of environment again.
Do you release or write music that is a reaction to kind of such, I mean, I know such events are extraordinary, but in general, events that are happening, does that feed into your songwriting?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes not the songwriting. There's a lot of songs on this record that are thinly veiled comments on stuff that's happening within politics and within the environment, and just where the hell we're going
Mm.
as a species on planet Earth. And you know, so there's a lot of that, and also, but one of the main things was the process of recording as well, because I we were talking a little bit about this before the broadcast, but the AI-ification, the and shitification of culture, and we really doubled down on the fact that we this recording was going to be quite imperfect in a way that
Mhm.
we would leave some of the distortion on some of the organ sounds, or things would be mixed a little bit too high, or my voice might be a bit flat here and there. And, we really wanted to keep the, we really wanted to be like a snapshot of how it sounded in the room at the
Yeah.
time. That's not to say there isn't lots of overdubs and there isn't lots of editing choices, but the whole process was about trying not to succumb to something that sounds squeaky clean, polished, and totally flattened as well. I just and a lot of modern music that I hear these days is like that, and it's just hegemony. It just sounds all the same to me. I sound like an old fart, but it really does.
I love that idea of embracing the imperfections because sometimes that's where the real kind of, for want of a better word, magic, or at least, points of interest can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried to do that a lot on the albums that we've recorded in the past.
Yeah.
On Fire Behind the Curtain, the sort of orchestral album, there was lots of room sounds, and the studio that we recorded in had a small, um, wooden fire, wood burning fire, and we kept all the pops and crackles of the fire and that. So there's always been these elements of imperfection, but here I really wanted to not to emphasize it, but just to write it out, to leave it in.
was wondering, after releasing so much music over the years, do you become your own reference point? Do you kind of look back at what you've done before and think, oh yeah, that worked really well? Or do you think I have to do something different next time? Do you kind of influence yourself, for want of a better way of putting it?
I mean, I think so. I think you want to change it up, you want to switch it up. I view it as, and the late great Steve Albini had said that, albums are a snapshot of that artist or that band in that period of time, and it's like a photograph basically,
Mhm.
and that's how I view it. So there's albums that I've released that I can't listen to anymore because they just sound nonsense to me. And but the important thing is that it's a document of that time and my mindset of that time as well. So, in answer to your question, I don't really go back and listen to. I rarely go back and listen to stuff that I've done in the past. Maybe if I'm trying to reference something about, or trying to relearn the song or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's an accumulation of of just that, and trying to treat it as a moment in time that
Mhm.
is fleeting, and so the influence isn't that strong from
I,
past records, basically.
I like that idea for, a photograph, a snapshot in time. And if we were to go back and see a snapshot from in our teen years and how we looked, we might say, well, it's the same person, but, it doesn't really reflect on what I'm doing now or who I am now.
And that can be an interesting exercise or thing to do as well, to see how far your thinking has come from the time that you did that weird psychedelic thing when you were like 18 or 20. And it's a really interesting thing to look back sometimes. But I like to reference the Pavement lyric in Shady Lane, which is glance, don't stare. And I've always had that sort of that relationship with my music that it's nice to glance at it, but if you stare too hard, then
Yeah.
it's you might go mad.
And what about going back to Prelitex? How do you feel once you finish an album then? Are you uh do you immediately move on to something else? Do you take time to think, yeah, I'm really proud of this and what I've done? I don't know if you're going to be playing it live at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be doing a lot of the songs live. Usually, it's just relief when it's finished because, like when it's actually mixed and then the process of mastering the album happens, it's just a great relief, and there is pride to it. I'm not going to lie and say
Mm,
that there's
absolutely.
you know I'm quite proud of it, and but mostly it's relief that we've we've done it, and we did it on that very we tracked this in 10 days and then mixed it in another in like 3 days after that, so 13 days overall.
Wow.
It's nice to know that everything's worked out, and especially in this instance when not everything was completely clear from when we went into the studio. The last track on the album is "Let's Leave Oil City by Spring," and when I went in to play for Neil, it was just these four chords and a little melodic hook, and that was it. And then we sort of wrote the song kind of in the morning and then recorded it in the afternoon, and
Uh-huh.
that's what comes out on the album.
And what are the changes that you've seen in kind of making and releasing, and I guess even promoting music over the years? Because, it's been a time of turmoil, the time that you've been releasing things.
I think it's I think it's got worse. I, I don't. I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, but I mean, there's good things and bad things. I think overall for artists, it's just got a lot worse because, as I talked about before, the enshittification, as it's coined, coined nowadays, is it's a real thing, and artists just are just not making any kind of money, and we all know that music and culture enriches our lives, right? We know that the UK music industry in a whole is worth billions of pounds every year for the treasury, but there's just no. It seems like there's no pushback against platforms like Spotify, um, or AI companies that completely ransack artists' back catalogue and then you know spit it out into something that's quite soulless and degenerate, to be honest. So I think there's a lot of worry about, and the other thing is that everybody's competing as well. The
Mm.
competition is so hot. Everybody is releasing music, and that's a good thing, because everybody's free to express themselves like they should be. But at the same time, it's almost, I would say like maybe 30 years ago, you'll remember as well as me that you would sign to a label and that would be released, and then you were lucky if you got press behind it, and then you would tour that. I think that's all gone.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to be too sort of bitter or sound too bitter about it, but these, I don't know if you've read this whole interview or opinion piece regarding the geese and the PR and the fact that all of these PR agents are basically cooking the algorithms by creating fake bots and fake fans on the internet. And it's not, we expect that from the major labels, but from independent labels or so-called independent labels, and then you have, these marketing companies that are basically just cooking the algorithm to get to to boost people's music. It's just the modern day equivalent of payola, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
no shade on the band Geese, because they're obviously really a really talented young band. I just think that illusion that everybody is on the same playing field and the internet has democratized music and art is a fallacy. I think it's just an illusion.
Yeah, it is
Sorry to
interesting.
say.
No, I mean, such practices were always going on. You used to hear about record company people going into record shops and buying 100
Yeah.
new copies of a single or something. And I just read a piece about Sheffield music scene, but they were talking about the Arctic Monkeys and how there were rumors around them that Alex didn't write the songs and that there was a bit of jiggery pokery going on to boost them. So, but it's now the fact that it's now done at a kind of click of a button, if you like, and yeah, it does seem to be, the easier you make it, the more it's going to happen, I guess.
I mean, the thing that bothers me is that these bands or their managers pay thousands of pounds. We're talking, $3,000 a month to hire a company to farm bot fans so that their music is amplified across the internet. And you know, I'm too young for the first wave of punk, but in the 90s when I was a teenager, this kind of stuff was anathema. And I don't, like you said, it's always happened. Payola has always been a thing, and marketing agents have always taken record company execs out to dinner, blah, blah, blah. It just, I don't know, it's the illusion that a lot of music journalists, a lot of music writers, and a lot of indie scenesters want to create, that music is a democracy and everybody has a level playing field.
Yeah.
I think the Arctic Monkeys is probably one of the last bands that were truly, um, they were truly organic.
Yeah.
They they, they started from as a teenage school band and then built themselves up through
Mm.
MySpace, and it's a shame that that kind of doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That there's no place that it can happen. Just before we finish up, Adam, you mentioned that you're going to be playing live. Have you got any dates that you could let us know about?
I'm playing in Edinburgh. It's a private house. It's a house show. But if anybody wants to DM me on Instagram, I can let them know where this house is. It's in Newington. It's at a friend's house. He's putting on a lot of other really cool acts. Burnt Paw from Edinburgh, Zonos, who creates ambient electronic music and is fantastic, and Picture Center kid who used to be in Peel favorite band Picture Center.
Hmm.
He's playing songs from the Picture Center, and then there's a couple of things in June, and then later on in the year. But I'm trying not to I'm trying not to spread myself too thin and saturate the Central Belt with my miserable songs.
Adam, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. All the very best with the album. I think it's a great one. And when
Thanks,
the live
Alistair.
gigs come around, enjoy those too.
Thank you so much.
And this is Adam Stafford and Flailing Cygnets.